let's talk through loops 3 and just go through a few of the ideas that this covers. So the first thing I'm going to sort of think through here is that this is a list of lists, right? So we have the outer part of it here. These brackets are defining the outer list, and then we have a series of 10 inner lists. Okay, so the first thing we're going to want to make is an outer list, so an empty list to throw things into. So we've made an outer list. Okay, and then we're going to want to do a for loop, much like we've done in the previous exercises, to put things into that list. So we're going to need a pair of them. So for, and we're going to use I because I is just a kind of convention on what your loop thing should be. So for I in range 10, and then we want to be able to say what we're going to do in I in range 10. So the first thing we want to do is make an inner list and make it empty. And then we'll say we want to make another loop, so for j in range 10. And then we want to put things into the inner list. So inner list append, and then the number we're going to put in here is changing slowly, right? So we want to put in I, because I is the outer list that changes slowly. Now, if we do that, it's going to put the number on, so we need to convert that into a string. Now, that's cool, that's all done. Then we need to, once we've finished that loop, we've put 10 things into that list, we want to put the inner list into the outer list. So outer list dot append inner list, and then we want to return the outer list. So just to like be sane here, let's run that and make sure it works. Okay, so I assume we're still recording. Yes, I think we are. Okay, so our outer list looks pretty much right. So what we want to do is walk through this here and like talk through what's actually happening. So I'm going to take that breakpoint out, put a new one in, and restart the debugger. Okay, so I'm going to just pull this down because we don't really need it right now, because what I want to focus on is this area over here to the left where it says locals. So what I want to get you into thinking about is the idea that every line that you run will either create something new or modify something that exists. And we call this changing the state of the program. So when I run line 93, it's going to declare, because this is the first time we've done it and there's nothing in the locals, it's going to declare a variable called outer list, and it's going to set its value to an empty list. And so if I step over that, we see we've got a new local variable called outer list, which has the value empty list. And this ability to read the line as it is, not what you think it's going to be or what you want it to be, is a super important skill. So often when I say, well, what does line 93 say? People will say, oh, it's going to be the values 0 to 9. I'm like, well, why? Why is it going to be the value 0 to 9? Yeah, sure, it's going to be value 0 to 9 eventually, but right now it's going to be an empty list. And what it's going to be eventually doesn't matter. And programming is very good at teaching you to see what is happening right now, because what will happen in your desire is often wrong. So the whole point of learning to program is to learn to let go of the idea that you know what's going on and get you to think very carefully about what is happening in the moment, very much in the moment. So the question now is, what is going to happen on this line, on line 94? So we're saying for I in range 10. Now, range 10 gives us back an iterator that gives us the numbers from 0 to 9. And so the first time we hit it, it's going to give us back the number 0. And so I is currently doesn't exist because it's never been declared before. So if we step over it, it declares a new variable that is 0. We have that I, we can do something with it. And now this line here, inner list, is an empty list, and we can declare it as a new variable, and then we can fill it, we can put the thing into it as an empty list. So we've got an outer list and an inner list, and they're both empty. So in much the same way, j in range 10 creates a new variable called j and sets it to be 0. So now we've got these 4 things in scope. So when we append something to the inner list, it's the string of I, so the string of 0. We do that, and now it appears in the inner list. So we can keep hitting that a bunch of times, and it just fills up that list. So j is 7, j is 8, j is 9. Now when we get to 9, we see that there's no more things in that range. And so the loop control line 96 says, okay, this is no good. We'll just step out of that. So boop, off it goes to the next line that says outer list dot append inner list. So we hit that and it pushes it back in here. So what this is doing is kind of stepping through and doing kind of what we would expect it to do, as long as we don't think too hard about what we think it might do at some point in the future. So now we step over that one and I becomes 1. So now I is going to be 1 for the duration of this inner loop. So this one here, when we ask what is this going to do, it's going to reset the inner list to be an empty list. It's not adding anything to the list, it's just overwriting it. It's saying, I don't care what you are now, you're going to be an empty list just for this line. So it goes from being full to being empty again. Now it's not emptying it, it's just writing an empty one over the top. It doesn't care what was in it before. So, and see, now it's getting filled up with 1s, 6, 9. And so when we get to 9, it'll jump over and it'll pop that into the outer loop. And so this process of going through and very carefully debugging requires you to do this kind of mental game where you say to yourself, well, what is the current state, and will I create something or modify something with the next line? So when we run this line, I is currently 1, but when we run it, I will become 2. That's my guess. So we're going to modify the state to be 2. And it did. Good. So inner list becomes an empty list. So we're going to modify the state of inner list to become an empty list. State is modified, so state is modified. These are the concepts we need to think about. There is a state, and it's either going to have something new put into it, or something that exists there is going to be changed. There we go. So the state has been modified to become an empty list. J becomes 0, so the state again has been modified. And so you'll see that state tends not to get new things unless you're running it for the first time. So state is being modified, lots of modified, and then eventually we put a new breakpoint here and just let it run out. The state gets modified to the point where we have that field of numbers, and then it's all good.